Okay, good. The board tonight consists of Phil Cox, who's construction management developer, Leslie Costa, who is a registered landscape architect, and Nick Avery, who's a historic architect as well, and myself, I'm a general contractor. So that being said, I'm going to call the roll here. Our first petition is finals for West Main Solar LLC applicant. We have heard their conceptual plan before. Who would like to speak for their final plan?
Good evening, I'm Jean Haggerty, and I work for Wood Environmental Services, and I'm representing the LLC developers, West Main Solar One, and we have Tudy Solar with us as well as our landscape architect. I'm going to do a brief overview. We've seen it before, we've seen the volume that we gave you. I'll hit the highlights one more time for people that have been here before, and then turn it over to our landscape architect. I think that's we're here to answer any questions. So let me introduce the project. So this is along West Main at map 44, lot 15. It's about an 18-acre site, now almost totally treed. So the development will involve it's basically all trees. So it does slope from the northeast corner down to the southwest corner, about 40 feet across the site. And there's no obvious entryway now, so we'll be adding an entry. So the development looks something like this. So we'll be out of the 18 acres, we're clearing about 12.2 acres. That will leave a 50-foot buffer all the way around the grades as required. But you see at the bottom, in addition to the rays within that area, are 3 stormwater ponds. We didn't have these last time we were here. They got the DEM and actually just received the permit from DEM for the stormwater last Friday. So we do have the permit in hand. But that probably was just the application. So we have 3 stormwater ponds on the bottom and one on the northwest corner. By taking the trees down, we're not doing any regrading, but we are obviously impacting hydraulics by the trees. So the stormwater system's been designed with standards to make sure we capture all runoff for the 100 years long. The entryway is relatively new, coming in from Route 114, and so we also needed a RIDOT public transportation permit. We also just got that permit last week. The application packet, we did get confirmation of the design coming in from the highway into the site. It'll be about 12-foot wide. The end itself 20 feet wide, coming down to 12-foot wide road, the 12-foot wide gate. The entire arrays will be surrounded by a 6-foot high chain link fence that's about 6 inches off the ground. Critters can meet. Not a lot, to the design. The solar panels themselves go to transformer pads. Transformer pads then go to poles. There's several set of poles that are along the access road that lead out on West Main, connected to bridge pole on West Main Road. So when we were here last time, most of your questions, because there's no actual building on the site, so buildings. The conversation was almost always around screening, making sure that we had adequate screening. So we have fencing to meet requirements, no buildings. We do have a small sign on the page that Mike's on there on the bottom left. A small sign that will be on fencing. Other pictures are mostly water controls, control. Final piece. Again, these details that look at the stormwater basins and stuff. So in order to get into the meat of this, which I think is the screening, I'm going to ask Kevin to come up at your meeting on March 16th. I think we were here last. We did get comments from you that were predominantly about the screening, making sure we had the right trees that we were looking for, right mix of things, covering properties appropriately. So introduce Kevin.
Thank you very much. My name is Kevin Alberson. I'm a registered landscape architect from Whitford, Rhode Island. I was brought onto the project team to, in particular, look at the screening elements of the project, particularly from any budding residences and public roadways. And that started with a review of the site in winter conditions to just take a look at the project from a buffering standpoint, sort of a worst case scenario with the majority of leaf cover off the trees. What I found out there was that the perimeter of the site in particular, there's sort of a mixture wooded environment, some larger sort of Norway maples and things of that nature, things that you would see sort of on those peripheries of developed residential areas. But the site is fully wooded now, but however, it was at one point clear. So there's evidence of that sort of successional growth that happens in those areas. There are some native species that we found in there, including some viburnum species, some winterberry, blueberry, things of that nature that, again, you would kind of see growing in these types of soils on those edge environments. I worked closely with the engineering team on the layout of the site to sort of minimize the amount of clearing necessary for the size of the development that's required for the project to be functional. One of those things, as you can see on the western side of the site, as the entryway comes in, we looked at adjusting the layout of the roadway in order to make sure that there's no straight view shots, for lack of a better term, into the project area. So we included a little bit of a sort of lack of better terms, coming into the site. But knowing that the fact that when you do stand there straight down on West Main Road, there would be some potential views through there. So we tried to address that with some additional shrub vegetation at the entryway into the site. As Gene had mentioned before, there's a 12-foot service gate that comes in. The entire site is surrounded by chain link fence for security purposes, which we have placed, rather than on the property line, we've placed it on the inside edge of what we're calling our limits of clearing. Methodology of the buffering from the residential properties is generally we have a 50-foot no-cut buffer at the entire perimeter of the site. Although, as you can see, along the northwestern area, sort of along the entire northern edge, except for as you get close to the eastern edge, it's much in excess of that, up to 100 feet or close to it as you get towards the west. 50 foot all the way along the eastern border of the site and along the southern border of the site. But also, as you can see from West Main Road, we have a no-cut buffer of approximately 250 feet from the public right of way. Interior of that, you'll see those areas that are highlighted in sort of a light green with a crosshatch pattern in those. Those areas that we call areas of limited vegetation removal. And the intent of that is that we want to keep all the understory vegetation that is possible within that area, but with cutting of larger trees that would shade the solar capacity for the facility. So what we're looking in that area is to actually prune things that are over, say, give or take, over 12 feet in height, but leave everything that's under that height for additional screening on the interior. What we've also found is that there's a lot of seed stock that's in that area that once the shaded canopy of some of those larger maples and things is removed in those areas, although we're being cognizant of trying to keep everything within that 50-foot no-cut buffer, that's including all trees and shrubs, that it actually starts to thicken up the underbrush in those areas. So in addition to that, you can see in particular along that eastern property line, but we're doing it along the southern property line as well. There's an area that's called an area of temporary clearing that in typical solar, not typical, similar solar projects, what we found is most effective is to keep that no-cut buffer, then just cut a swath at the edge of that no-cut buffer to be able to input our new supplemental buffer plants. And that's what you see, those dark green spiky icons. Those are evergreen trees that we're proposing along those areas. from the last design review board. One of the comments, we had more of a mixed buffer in that area, a lot more shrubs, a lot more trees in addition to the large evergreen trees. But the comment was made that we can continue to have some of those sort of understory trees and shrubs, but they didn't want them directly behind the residences. So that this plan reflects that that adjustment. The reason why I wanted to do a mixed buffer along there is because we didn't want to create a scenario where we're creating essentially like a green wall look to it. We want to have something that's a lot more layered in buffering, something that you would see much more readily on these you know, sort of edge environments. So it would be something that would utilize plants that are native plants within the area, create some habitat, create some additional screening behind the no-cut buffer, but then all of that area between that limited clearing area, which we are planting with supplemental vegetation, and the fence would all be natural native vegetation, natural vegetation that exists out there, shrub vegetation. That would be maintained to a height of that 12, give or take, height, a little bit higher as you get towards the property line, but that's something that's a site decision sort of along there. So I'm not going to say everything's going to be exactly at 12 feet. There's going to be along the southern buffer, in addition to the supplemental buffer, this was also a comment that came from the last design review board meeting. They wanted to have a buffer of entirely evergreen tree vegetation, which we are showing in that image that you're looking at right now. It's a mixture of some native evergreen trees, including some white spruce and white pine. Just again, to not create a monoculture along that area, but we would be still maintaining that 50-foot no-cut buffer. And then on the northern edge of that, due to the fact that we need to have the stormwater controls in those areas for the site design, there's going to be a berm along that southern border of the stormwater basins. That berm would be planted with the trees. You effectively get the height of the berm plus the trees area. Along the western side of the site, you can see where it butts closely to residential. We are providing some dense supplemental vegetation in that southwest corner. But due to the fact that we have such a wide border of no-cut vegetation, 250 plus that 60 feet to 80 feet of areas of limited vegetation removal, aka keeping everything that's a shrub vegetation in there, we didn't feel that supplemental vegetation in that area is necessary. In order to maybe help better visually represent this, we did do some cross-section views. Look at the next sheet. And I do have a color version of that visual presentation. I have a board. If the board would so want to review that, it might help visually to be able to see that. But what this is showing here is I did a typical cross section from along the eastern property line as well as one along the southern property line. Those are the areas being most affected to having closer residential backyards. So the top image that you can see there is a cross section that's cut through the site along at the right side, we'll call it, which is the east side of the image, is a representation of a swoop. Happens to be all the time. You can see on the far right, on the upper image there, far right side of that image is a sort of stand-in for human analog in a typical residence along that eastern area. With the grade coming down, you can see that the grade is generally flat going from east to west, aka right to left. But then at the near the proposed fence line, the fence it does drop down a little bit, but generally speaking, it's fairly level through there. So what this represents is from the right again to the left, you can see that the sight lines going through those dark dash lines with the arrows on them. What you see with those trees and the understory, that's that no-cut buffer plus the existing vegetation on the abutting property, which we're not trying to take credit for necessarily because the abutting property owner obviously can do what they want up to their property line. But we're maintaining that minimum 50-foot no-cut buffer. And then you can see what I was talking about, that 12 to 15-foot area. That's the area of temporary clearing, where you can see that we're planting some supplemental vegetation, that evergreen tree that's noted there. And then from there, towards the east, towards the west, towards the left of your screen, that's the area of shrub vegetation that we can make, right, 10 to 12 feet. Along the southern property line, we felt it was important to show a cross section through there, just because it's a slightly different buffering methodology. We do have the analog again on the right-hand side of your screen of person at first floor elevation looking towards the site with a typical home. And then the site you can see is, again, it's fairly close in elevation to the properties that are adjacent to it. But between that area, we have the 50-foot no-cut buffer, then that berm that sits in there before the basin. So we're going to be raising that elevation along the southern edge of the basin, and then planting that fairly substantially with evergreen. Unless there are any questions of the board, yes, there's one.
What's the minimum offset off of the fence line that is needed for like, to not shade solar arrays? But like if you wanted to put in like a large like shade trees and put some shade trees back in.
Sure. I mean, it varies a little bit with what the site is and with what the size of the panels are and their capacity is, but generally speaking, in my experience, on east-west shading, we're looking at a 2-to-1 limit. So if you have a 20-foot tall tree on the outside of it, you need 40 feet before the panel to be able to get that. On the south, it's more of 3-to-1. So if you have a 20-foot tall tree, you need 60 foot. What we're proposing, however, in these areas, so we've got the 10 to 12 foot sort of height. I think we have, I want to say it's about 10 feet, correct, between the panels, and basically be able to have access around the panels for whatever that may be for maintenance.
Yeah.
So we're shooting for that 10 to 12 height. That's why I was referring to that. Doesn't necessarily need to be 10 feet, and then straight to the additional buffer. There could be some layering that occurs, but it's. What I found in all of these, that I've been involved with, is that largely, you'll see that's noted in my notations as well, that largely it's an on-site decision for a lot of things. So like, we can place a tree on the plan exactly where we want it, but when we get out in the field and we have the clearing, it might be better 10 feet over to the left and to the right. So it's a little bit of site adjustment that needs to happen. I see that similarly for those limited clearing areas. Like if there's a good sized tree that just happens to be just on the other side of it, we're not just going to cut it. It doesn't affect that.
The trees that are going to be newly planted inside the buffer area, is the intent to keep them always limited to 12
No.
feet?
No, they will be able to grow to full height. That was sort of baked into the way that we laid it out and designed it.
And what's the anticipated mature height of those trees?
Well, it varies depending on the trees, but what we have, say along the eastern buffer, we have a bunch of eastern red cedar. They're a very variable species, as you can imagine. So they can go anywhere from 15 feet in height, and probably their shortest up to 50, 60, 70 feet. They're very sort of, they're not, unless they're a dedicated species of exactly which one it is, there's a lot of variability in eastern red cedar. But we also have some white pines. They can get as high as 80, 70, 80 feet, even more. But at that point, what we'd like to do is make sure we have that shrub vegetation underneath it, because some of those larger trees, if they're not sheared and pruned, they tend to start to get a little looser. So that's the intent of having more of a mixed buffer.
And on this, like, the southeast corner.
Yeah.
Why is that left open? There's nothing.
At the very corner over there.
Yeah,
Mainly because directly from that view, there's no views into the site from there, from abutting residences. But we've also increased that limited or shade pruning sort of limited vegetation removal area to like 150 feet. So it's from that, directly from that southeast corner, there's probably close to 100 feet. Plus the 50-foot no cut buffer, which triangulates to a lot wider, so. But should there be open, clear areas in those locations, once the site is open, the intent certainly is to buffer that. So we don't anticipate the need for that, but if necessary, I think the site.
I'm just thinking like if we're clearing all the hardwood trees out of the whole site, if there's a way to get some large shade trees to start growing in different spots, if there's a place to put them, it would probably be a good benefit.
It's a good point, you know, graphically on the plan, we kind of did an offset and an offset, but you're very right, in that corner, we could probably even sneak that no cut buffer into there a little bit, or at least plant some larger tree species and things that we want in that area. And I don't see that affecting the buffering, I mean, affecting the shading. We are significantly far away.
Yeah.
And there's no future plans on subdividing that western side to develop adjacent to Western Road.
That's above my pay grade.
Let me know.
Not that I know of, I haven't been aware.
Yeah, because that would essentially eliminate all that.
Scott Holmes, renewables. The frontage on West Main, that's no developable plan for right now, but if it was developed, we would have to go to the zone screen right here, there's a building there, we have to go through everything. Kind of, there's no future plans for that, but if there was something put there, it would have to be developed. You know, we'd probably screen what we had better if the building.
Is that house currently for sale?
The house isn't part of this project.
No, I know, but it just has me.
Here where the restaurant is?
Yeah.
I don't know.
But it's all signed
Yeah.
too.
As far as the heights, we typically go from the array, we go 2.5 height, 2.5. And then the fence line, we was 6 feet, and we go 2.5 fence line to the array.
Yeah, Liz and I were talking, both thinking that the southern border is very densely planted with from the neighbors, but the eastern side seems as if it was it's more spotty. Sort of as if the Japanese with the slight lines that was just, you know, if they're back deck, here's where they're gonna see, but we both sort of felt that the eastern side should be more densely planted, probably the southern side. And also, I don't know, I haven't walked the site out actually, but I don't know how thick the existing vegetation is there in that buffer zone. But it seems that a single row, even though it's slightly staggered of mixed everything and so forth, if there can be, not the whole length, but every so often, like especially where there might be a view, a second layer of planting behind it. So it's not just, you know, Leland's and Cornice Christmas open, and then, you know, a couple things in front. A second layer in, not necessarily the whole length of it, but in areas where it's more likely that people will see it, because this is obviously a major change to their view. But,
I know a couple people live in that neighborhood and I asked them about it, and they were saying like the 50-foot buffer isn't where most of the trees are, it's mostly on the interior, so that is really significant. It's really important to.
and a 50-foot buffer would be two Norway maples. Straight views, underneath straight through. Just want to make sure that there's enough.
Yeah, and I think, as I mentioned before, with sites like this, it's sort of a performance-based design. Certainly, I don't think there's any intent from our team to be able to have any clear views from anybody's property right into the site. So, you know, site adjustment to two trees and things of that nature, if there's, there's clear view corridors, then obviously we would want to address it.
Quick question, were you planning on green chain link or regular?
That was part of the intent of putting the fence on the inside of all the buffering, that's meant to be there so that from the adjacent properties and things, it wouldn't be vegetation.
To blend in?
Yeah, just so-
Yeah, I know.
To double make sure that they. I mean, it's like not the actual metal.
Oh, you're talking
about
about well, either both,
Is that
the
what-
the green coated fence or the screening they can
Yeah.
do at construction sites, like a lot of people. That's trash.
Yeah.
If you put the green fabric on it, I think it actually makes it more visible.
Worse, yeah.
There's also the potential of that, obviously this is going to be maintained, but that fence in the middle, it is more of a maintenance concern. It's kind of like weed barrier, they put down
It
planting
starts to
beds,
get
and
messy.
after a couple of years, it starts to come back up.
Board have any other questions?
On your cross-section elevation, did you do some survey of when the angle versus the height of the trees? The array?
Like a shading analysis. Not a particular study for that, just generally looking at the heights of the trees that we found out there and where they would be kind of on average.
And so those trees are relative to scale of the actual trees that are laid out.
Correct.
25 to 30.
35 to 40.
Somebody had asked me about, retention ponds. Is that basically just used for a 100-year storm? If that fills up with water, is it like automatically just going away or is it gonna be sitting?
So they are infiltration ponds, so they will go medium 16 feet long infiltration. They do overtop it with roots. So they built for 100 years storm with a fixture of 1 foot of freeboards, so it's a foot. Then we look at from right to left, we do have a overflow here, and then they will go up on the left to the front. So if there is any overflow, it's controlled.
It's not gonna be standing.
Now, it's not now, that would be retention pond, these are infiltration ponds meant to infiltrate water.
Okay.
Is there any interested in butters or people who would like to speak to this petition that are present tonight? Yes, the lady right there. State your name for the board, please.
Mark Rogers, 73 West Passage Drive and 0 West Main Road, abutting the north side. I was wondering if you could, do a little bit of talking about the north side, didn't get much mention. And I was wondering about the setback that was in green. So on the north side, there doesn't seem to be that green buffer that goes around the rest of the property. It's just wondering if there's reason.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah, just for-
Absolutely. So along the north buffer, because the shading is not as big of a concern along that area, We can maintain all the no-cut buffers, no cutting of the trees. And so as you go farthest to the east, you're maintaining the 50-foot, but as you go towards the west, we're actually increasing that to the so if we were to continue that around, what you would see is essentially a 50-foot of the darker green aerial area, plus that, 0 to 50-foot sort of wedge of green. So from a standpoint of the buffering, we prefer to just keep that as it is all the way up to our property, or our project, I should say. So that's why there's not that lighter green all the way around there. What you see along that edge is some supplemental planting based on some borders that we looked at through there. And that's what those additional trees that you see along there, the kind of spiky things that are evergreen trees. The round, small, dark green ones, those are like evergreen shrubs in nature. And then some larger trees. We have some. That's fringe trees and the sort of something I'll give about that.
Well, on the east side, we have the 50-foot buffer, but then you have also have an additional buffer along there.
This, on the west, east, and south, if we have this buffer here, which is the shade buffer, which is going to cut low. And when you get to the north, there's none of that shade buffer, none of that is getting
But
cut.
there's only a 50-foot setback on the north
That's
side.
a no cut, and it increases to, I think, 100 something. Leave that buffer to the fence line.
But I thought that it was kind of understood that the 50-foot wasn't really large enough for any.
Setbacks prior to 50, you've been doing 50 foot, don't cut all around it, we have the low cut buffer, and back to doing full no cut buffer. Sorry.
So on this end, though, where my home is, it's 50-foot setback.
Your home's up above the probably middle, up top, and the left side.
But that buffer is my buffer, not a buffer that you're giving me. You know what I'm saying?
We're giving a 50 to 100 something on the west corner.
I think that's what I'm trying to say is that the 50-foot setback, I thought that was free, that 50 feet. was not free.
We just overpass requires us to have.
All right, well,
And there's we have additional plantings to reinforce that one, right? So we have a 50 to 100 and 50 is all the way, requires us to have 50. Evergreen plantings along that.
all right, well, I would just like to note the board here that when the 50-foot was suggested, they were like, that's the minimum, and it will be more sufficient.
I believe there's another person that would like to speak tonight. Yes, sir, step forward and, I'm sure name to Leslie.
Louis Lutender, 94 Sweet Farm Road. So, I guess my house is in the corner, that's, we had spoke about, bigger buffers. Like, 31 feet. 50 foot of the ordinance,
No, we talked ordinance, we talked setbacks. If we have a 50-foot no cut, which is the ordinance, and we have this additional no cut zone for the project, so the setback, our part is actually to our fence line.
So how far are you from my property, from, I'm in the corner there?
So
94.
so it's 85 plus 50. So
135 feet.
Okay, so that's what that.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, spoke about the ordinance way back. He had spoke about use of the minimum. And then that the board would have a final say. So being that this is all residential, that whole street is all residents. Where
No, I know, that's why we're 135 feet on that whole side. We're almost 2.5 times minimum.
are you planting or something?
Yes. So then in addition, so just to clarify, the darker area, that's the aerial sort of photograph, that's 50 feet. Actually, 50 foot is a setback, but 30 feet, I believe, is right? So we're gonna maintain 50-foot no cut. Then that area that I was saying that's limited clearing, basically just have to mulch and plant in there. So that strip through there would be supplemental plantings. Between that and what we're calling the limited vegetation removal, so it's 135 feet. 50 feet as is, 85 feet, that's essentially the larger trees are removed, but within that 135, we're also providing 50 feet.
Just wondering, so. As we're actually going down and look at this. So, are you from? Because, every time the sirens go on, this week, there, it is, very.
I think they're all, I
Every
live,
morning.
I live in Middletown and they're all over my neighborhood. I think they're.
Is there any other interested parties that would like to speak to this?
We have two on Zoom.
Okay,
Robin Youngkin. Robin, if you could, your name and address for the record.
Can you hear me okay? Hello?
Yeah.
The sound is really poor on this end when I'm listening to this meeting. My name is Robin Youngkin. I'm at 49 West Passage Drive. And I'm also on the north end of this proposal. I'm also concerned about the buffer. Also, there are a lot of mature trees on that lot and a lot of wildlife. I know that that's probably not your main concern, but it is something to think about. The land on Aquidneck Island is a scarce resource. So I just wish that the town would think more carefully about the planning that goes into some of these proposals that are coming to town. The people who live on West Passage, Sweet Farm, Mariel Rose, in my neighborhood, we've put our blood, sweat, and tears into our homes and into our lives here. And now we're faced with looking at this solar array that's going to be right in the middle of our neighborhood. At the last planning board meeting, the planning board voted to ask the town council to hold a public workshop to discuss solar in Portsmouth. And I think it would be great if you decided to hold off on putting this proposal onto the next stage until the public gets to speak about solar in Portsmouth. I don't know if that's possible or not, but there's a lot on the line here in terms of being a homeowner, a resident of Portsmouth, in the town itself. And this might have started as, for me, as trying to keep something out of my neighborhood. But there are other proposals that are coming down the line, one of them right near the reservoir in our drinking water. And I really think that the town needs to stop and think about what is happening. And, I know you have limited power, but I have no power at all as a taxpayer and as a resident of Portsmouth. And I am willing to stand up and say, no, I don't want this. So I hope that you, who are officials in town, are willing to do the same. Thank you.
thank you. There was another, Shelley Nicholas. Shelley, if you could give your name and address for the record.
Excellent, thank you. My name is Shelley Nicholas and I'm at 59 Mariel Rose Drive. So I'm in a butter in the southeastern corner. I wanted to actually, before I begin, say thank you again for maintaining the Zoom calls. I appreciate it. I have 3 small children at home and these things start like right at bedtime and I work at night. So I appreciate the opportunity to with a Zoom call. Thank you. I'd also like to thank the board member who inquired about why there aren't supplemental plantings in the southeastern corner. I'd like to request that there are additional supplemental plantings to just help maintain some shielding for the view on our end of the properties, if at all possible. Something I thought was interesting about the sight lines, when you look at the depiction on page 24, it shows an individual standing what looks like maybe based on the scale, 75 feet, 100 feet into their own lot. We spend the majority of our time in our backyard, kind of along that property line. That's where we have a garden. And so our sight lines really start at like the 50-foot buffer, no cut buffer. So while you assume that there probably is enough of a distance for us to have our views shielded, I disagree. So just requesting those additional plantings that you're putting to just help us maintain a shielded view. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak. I appreciate it.
Comments on that? The landscape plan? Good. We'll look at the dimension, so we could carve out that corner with wide and no cut buffer. Because of the shade, right? Almost that triangle bottom piece there, we could go from the evergreen to the evergreen. Have a little bit more there, if we need it, but we could probably gain that whole corner, we could take that corner out, and make that a no cut.
But yeah, it's great. That's great. Any other questions by the members of Karen?
I just want to clarify, is that Laura, are you the one right in the north and center?
Yes.
Okay, that's what I thought.
I did want to ask if there's anything that we can do to make this list intrusive on the property line, 50 feet from my property line. If there's anything you're willing to do, or if it's just minimum, are you willing to work with me, or?
I think we're willing to work with Kevin, and if the evergreen we have in place, we've done, this is a light industrial site.
No, your site, right? Your property, you mean?
No, we're sold the wall from a development. This is a light industrial site we developed as a light industrial facility. Along the plan, a oak facility can go in there. We're doing a pretty low impact development. We've done, I'm probably putting it out myself. We've done, a lot of screening around this project. We tried to keep the buffers there, and I think the Navy project did a lot of bad things on the street there, but they did up there right on the street. But I think we've been sensitive to the neighbors, and we've been agreeable to move evergreens, and we're trying to, the owner has a right to do something for the site, and no one, this site's been light industrial and commercial since water before, these houses probably. So we're trying to be as sensitive as possible. We're trying to do a lot of buffers. We're trying to screen it from the street, and we're willing to, look at the green, look at that buffer and places and work with people in the neighborhood and understand it, but that's.
I mean, the fact remains that you can try to make it sound as good as possible, but there's going to be a large industrial energy plant or Carlin's from my property line. You can say whatever you want, wherever you live. I'm sure you would have wanted it there. I'm not trying to, ruffle your feathers or anything.
I get what you're saying, but
You understand
it's
what I'm
a
saying?
light industrial site. People may want to see different things here, but something can be here. If the light industrial project went in here, it could be a 2-story building, 50 feet from the property line, 6-foot buffers. That's what could happen. If I was one of those owners, I wouldn't want to see a commercial building.
They don't want to see a solar site.
They don't want to see, and I get it, but I'm just saying, what can
If
be
you
done?
go through the neighborhood, you'll see the sign. We are about the solar farm.
I
But
understand.
if it is going in, I'm asking you if you would be able to work with me to have your solar energy plan, not right outside my property line, further back.
We're
than
willing
50
to
foot
work
minimum.
with the buffers we have on the project here and with the screening we have.
The answer is no, right?
I've just told you what I want to do. And I think
Okay, thank you.
I think that wraps up our first petitioner. If there's nobody else that would like to speak to this. Anyone wants to take a 5-minute break from the board, or I'll roll into the next one. Okay, good. Thank you for coming tonight. So our next petitioner this evening is a family residential. This is conceptual plan review. They've been before our board before. Peter Realty LLC applicant for a condominium development on 567 Bristol Ferry Road. And is there anybody from Peter Realty LLC or? Yes, ma'am.
I'm from Peter Realty LLC.
Okay, would you like to speak to your petition tonight?
No.
Okay. You're
I am
good
on-
tonight,
I am
everybody.
on
Yeah, okay, that's it.
I'm sorry, could you just tell me?
John McCoy, my office is 40 West Windsor Street in Providence, so I'm here to bring for the applicant. Yeah, this is really our second conceptual. We had a meeting back, I think it was in June, with you all, with some great suggestions there. I think it's a lot of good back and forth. So that was kind of the highest. Probably a lot of suggestions, one of which was dead end street going around, the sweeping the side. What we have tonight is we have an architect, our engineer, Josh Rose, to our attorney. We're going to zoom in, I believe, and we spoke to Mike, and I think we're ready to make it more detail what they've done. Answer your questions, and we'll try to steer as best we can. Otherwise, stay out of the way.
Okay,
So why don't I let them introduce themselves for the record?
sure, that'd be great. And who would be speaking first?
Denara.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Great. Hi. So my name, So my name is Damara Tui. I'm a registered architect in Rhode Island. I've been registered for a few years now, and I work locally for GMI Architects. Can we actually pull up the, let's say the site plan. So we were here a few months ago, and the development that we were proposing was along the northern end of the site with a roadway that went from the southern end to the east and all the way to the northern end. Based on the feedback and the comments, we looked at rearranging this new development to more of the southern or southeastern space of the lot. This allows for less length of roadway, as well as the ability to maintain the vegetation on the northern side of the site. We can move to the elevations now, please. And so you see from the elevations, we are proposing a very residential styled a duplex. We have a 1-bed with a 2-bed next to it. And we're still exploring the materiality, but it'll all be very traditional New England materials, clapboard, board and batten, cedar. We're trying to keep roof lines as low as possible, as minimal, to really just make this a very familiar and residential kind of language and scale. If you go back to the on the site plan, you'll see that we have this this connector piece along the southern side. Yes, thank you. When the development was on the northern side, we had this. It was a breezeway. So that way this new development could count as an addition to the existing structure that's there now. When we looked at relocating the southern end of the site, based on the suggestions from the board, we felt that making this connector be a solid structure seemed kind of out of character for this. So we're looking at making this more of a landscape pergola trellis structure that has smaller individual storage units for each of the units on the site. And I believe The civil engineer is also on. I believe he would like to add a few comments on the roadways and the access. I believe Josh is on. Possibly not. Oh, here he comes.
Can you guys hear me?
We can.
Yes.
Beautiful, okay. Forgive me for my ignorance on the Zoom, but here we go. After a few comments here, one of the things we tried to address that isn't shown on this plan is the shared driveway. We've been trying to tackle what's actually south of this lot and eliminate, there was a comment about the building being within a certain distance of this common driveway. And our goal is to actually, share a driveway throughout that actually incorporates this lot 52 here into that as well. That will not only help that, and as previously stated, separating the buildings, hopefully maximizing out the setbacks there with the building. We can try to maximize the distance to what's existing here on lot 52.
Does that affect any zoning changes on your part?
No, there was something from the town that specified, or they had a comment regarding the separation of the buildings, so we've done our best to maximize it, and I believe there's also some sort of reduction in size that we're working on as well. Obviously, that can be addressed later.
Yeah, I think, Mr. Chairman, you got to hit on it, kind of juxtaposing two things, design versus zoning. Before there was an issue, was it may recall there was a closed breezeway, so then it could be one building. Now, the architect, pergola, it looks nice, so it's a good question whether it's still an attached building, and Article 7, unfortunately. One of the things, and now we're adding a second, it's a second building. It's just, it's 7 zoning it. Kind of design, what's the better design that's come in versus, okay, now it's better design, maybe a couple of zoning violations. The question becomes, is this a better design practice that justified in this zoning way, should then go to the zoning board based on your findings here. So that's kind of where we are. Those two items 2 and 3 that Mr. Esquivel put in his memo. But those were not there before, I think, so it's now an issue. You hit on it just for.
I'm just curious, you were just saying about the shared driveway.
Yes.
On the south side of the property you're talking about, the new duplexes that are going along the back of the property, that are like, there's 3 different buildings.
Correct, yep.
Is that possible to share, like those 2 driveways that are like basically right next to each other going on either side of the property line? Not really a possibility to share that, right?
I'm sorry, what's the question?
Like, there's like 2 long driveways, one on the inside of the property line, and then the other one goes along the same exact length to the other 3 buildings on the east side of the back side.
It looks like the entrance is already shared.
Yeah, I was just curious if you could instead of having 2 driveways next to each other, if you can share it.
Yeah, that's fine. That would be ideal.
Correct, and that's something we're working on, obviously, to eliminate some of the comments here, as well as maybe the inconvenience of making a new driveway. Instead, share it and connect it and, make it work with what we have.
Yeah.
So I'm the developer of both of these
Yeah, that's
projects,
why
but
I'm
they're
asking,
2 separate condo associations.
Yeah.
That is ideal for us, is that it's a show driveway that goes, that goes to both lot 52A, 52B, and this one that we're talking about, which is the extra smaller 2 we want to add on lot 52. Definitely,
that would be ideal. And
Is that an option or?
well, from a condo doc point of view, that's exactly right, we can make that work.
But
From an easement point of view.
again, that comes up to point
So-
before the handbook, again, we got the design zoning.
Yeah.
Ideally, a shall drive and look better, it's permeable, all that kind of stuff, but you have to conform to street materials that are outside.
Flowering.
So, yeah, zoning versus design.
So let me ask this then. Mike has it down as another conceptual plan review. So are you gonna try to get an opinion from zoning before we have to make our recommendation? I mean, our recommendation isn't gonna change the zoning ordinance, we know that.
Oh, I know, and I'm the chair of my zoning board of council.
Yeah,
We listen to planning most of the time, occasionally.
right.
So I hear you on that, sure. But it's almost a chicken and the egg. Oh, the zoning board will get the recommendations. Don't know how they feel about that, because they're only your design. We're trying to avoid getting caught between the two. So again, it's the chicken and egg. There's no real preliminary zoning. Go and get opinions. They're usually the last resort.
Yeah.
So procedurally. It's a bit of a- but we think the design aspect of is best for the group. What may go wrong, it may go right. I find that needs to be the least necessary. So that's kind of where we are in those issues. Well, strictly this conceptual, certainly willing to listen. Right ideas. That's kind of what we do.
Is the architect still on?
Yes, I am. I'm just, yes, I'm on still.
Fine. So I have just one quick question. Do you feel that your conceptual design is complementary to the existing unit dwelling that's there? It looks quite different compared to.
Yeah, so one of the first versions of this, which is kind of what you're seeing now, is we were looking at making more of this more of this farmhouse style of a language. But now that we're moving through design a little more, we're looking at the big house. We're trying to pull some elements of the detailing and the trim work and the roof lines to this house now. So it looks more of the Victorian age and the with the historic nature, but still have a bit more of a contemporary twist to it.
I have it on.
In the Sarah J. house.
Yeah, it's a 2.5-story Victorian.
That's also another reason we're trying to minimize the scale of the house as well. So that way this development does not try to compete with the house that's there. We want it to kind of read as more of a separate entity. And that's why we're thinking this connector piece is not actually a solid, it's more of like a pergola landscape space. So, so we don't, well, design wise, I'm hoping not to have to match the big house directly, but of course we'll take the elements to make it look complementary.
So the footprint of the new development is, in fact, it looks to be larger than the existing home?
Well, yes, because our development, we have the box in the front, those are garages. So when you account for the garage footprint, the footprint is larger than the existing house.
So we could recommendations based on couple different things that are in our purview tonight. In and come back for finals. Discuss it, talk about it, and, revisit it. We've been before to before, and, I certainly walk the site again. It's been a few months since I just walked around the driveway.
Okay, know that. So your idea is you would give us some recommendations for design and then we go to zoning for planning next, or come back to you again before we go to planning and then zoning?
Maybe that for you. Yeah.
What? Come back here
Come
again?
back.
Yeah, we have to come back to find it here.
Great landscaping.
Okay.
And then, materials.
Materials, everything, yeah.
I mean, it's just, I can tell how far we are off on the zoning to, spending a lot of time.
Yeah.
Mr. McCoy would know.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea, Mr. Chairman. Maybe people at this stage. Maybe kind of that's, okay, this is what we need to do. Look at that. Normal application. Okay. That points us in the direction.
Yeah, right. Our board members feel about that.
Yeah, I think we can discuss it further.
Yeah. Okay. Any questions for our Zoom members who are on right now? No. Okay, so we will develop an opinion, and get it published shortly. On Leslie's schedule and how busy everybody in the board is. But
Yeah, the site's super accessible. There's
Yes.
a construction road to go back there.
mhm,
You'll be able to stake, you'll be able to see like the block, the houses that will be behind it.
Yeah.
And then you'll be able to see where on the corner this would fit in, to face it.
yeah, I'd
You'll
like
be able
to-
to, it'll be real
I'd like to
easy for you
see
to see
that.
it.
All right, we will work on that. Give us some time to, because I want to walk the site going out of town. But take this out, so.
That's fine.
All right, great, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right,
Zoom
bye,
Thank you, guys.
Bye.
Thank you.
Zoom members.
An hour.
Yeah, that's.
Not bad.
Not
So is
bad.
it Laura? The last.
Yeah, I know. Yeah,
So,
so we did look at the property before.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and I remember we were vacant. So,
Thank you, guys.
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
So I'm curious to see how that